Hey Warriors, this is Promise Phelan. How are you? I hope you're enjoying your 2019. It's been an incredible year so far. I had the opportunity recently to sit down with a close friend, a colleague, and someone for whom I have a tremendous amount of respect. His name is Ken Chow, and he is, there's so many things I could say about him, but he's one of the most established and most effective operational CFOs I've had the experience of working with, and he's just tremendous. And so the inspiration for this podcast, actually it's broken into two parts, is really I wanted to get into the mind of the current CFO so that I can enlighten for all of you the path to really what it means to hire a CFO, to partner with a finance leader, and kind of what the benefits are and how they select you. So I think there's some really good nuggets here that you'll appreciate. The second part is our love story, if you will, how I met Ken, how we worked together, and what we learned from that experience. And in the end, there's a couple of really wonderful nuggets that I enjoyed around women in leadership and non-traditional entrepreneurship. So I hope you enjoy it and you have as much fun as I did sitting down with Ken. We actually had the honor of sitting in the Mozilla offices in Mountain View, Silicon Valley. And so that was a tremendous conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Here it comes. Let's pivot now and talk about how our relationship, and you set up two things, which is communication and chemistry. So let me give people a little bit of context. So in early 2015, I took over TapInfluence as their CEO. So the company had been in business for 6-7 years prior to me joining, had raised money prior to. I was based in Boulder, and I was from the Bay Area. And so I moved in April of 2015 from here to there. And I thought all I would need was a coat, and it would be just like the Silicon Valley. We know that's not true. But, it was a really small agency at the time, if you remember, with the gross margin profile of an agency, and was, one of the leading providers of kind of influencer marketing at the time, but more from a services-based approach. And so when I joined, I immediately realized I had to do a bridge round. I don't know if you remember my realization. And I called FLG, which is Financial Leadership Group, and you were assigned to me. And I remember first meeting you at a coffee shop. I don't know if you remember. And
I remember.
I did not think we were going to have great chemistry. I remember, I'll tell you now since we're friends, but your shirt was so white, your sleeves were so perfectly rolled up, and you were early, and you had a PC. And I thought, we are nothing alike. I'm an Apple girl. I'm late. Right. I ran before I got here. But I remember thinking, wow, this is intimidating. This is a CFO who's been in public companies, and I've got a company that's doing, kind of low 7 figures, and I've got to figure out how to do a change management exercise, change the business model, and I've got to raise money now and again in 6 to 9 to 12 months, which obviously we did. We were very successful on the fundraising side. So what was your impression? And let's kind of talk about that experience and be nice, because this is being recorded.
It was a great experience. I too remember it like it was yesterday. And I thought, I represent the bastion of being a CFO.
Right.
And so, I don't wear polo shirts to first meetings.
No.
I don't, I wear jeans on Fridays and some other days. But the reality is that I wanted to meet Promise and you and see, okay, is this going to work? I was new to the consulting world. I had never done consulting.
Oh, that's right.
before.
We were your first client. Okay.
You were my first client. And so I wanted to leave a good impression. And I walked away thinking, I don't know if we have the right chemistry because I try and be as buttoned down as I can be and as organized as I can be. And here's this woman who comes in and super energetic, like instant energy, smart, articulate, but sort of in one space talking about one subject, then moving to another subject with not a lot of transition. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to follow this woman. And in the end, we said, let's give it a shot.
Right.
And what I found was over time, we developed a chemistry that I cherish. I cherish our friendship. but we don't have to be the same, but we were very complementary. You're outward bound, customer focused, which I can appreciate a ton, but you sized up the opportunity and the challenge really well. And I said, okay, she really has thought this through. And it was pivoting a company from what it had been a services business, which is a tough business and hard to scale, to a SaaS-oriented platform. And I'm like, wow, that's hard. But if someone can do it, I think this woman can do it. Because
and we did it.
Yeah.
We did it in 3 quarters.
I promise you are a force of nature.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And I love taking on a challenge with somebody who can make something happen. And when you told me you were based in Boulder, I said, yeah, Boulder's not the Silicon Valley. And I think that you learned a valuable lesson that the Valley is not just a physical place, it's a mindset. And it's a culture.
It's a spirit.
And it was just different.
Yeah.
The great thing about it was that you rolled with it and tried to introduce, a different culture. Culture's the toughest thing to change. And in a short period of time, I think you were very successful. That wasn't without some pain along the way. And I wanted to make sure that I, as a CFO working with you, hey, I got your back. I always will make sure that you are successful, because if I make sure that you're successful and the organization and company is successful, the other stuff tends to take care of itself. Whether it's working with a board and giving honest feedback, both to the board and also to a CEO, to getting involved in the business. And I love getting involved in the business. I just think that if you're involved in the business and the operation, you're just a better CFO. You understand everything that's coming through. And so my first impression was, not sure if it's going to work. And, after our experience, absolutely it worked.
I can't say enough great things. And you're a phenomenal partner. And there are kind of 3 things that were pivotal for me in that relationship. So you use the word pivot. So pivot means, the physics of a pivot are, you're going in one direction, you stop, you rotate, and you accelerate in the opposite direction. Those are physics, right? If you're playing golf, if you're ballroom dancing, those are the physics. I wanted to do that really fast. All those 3 things. Stop, turn, and go in an opposite direction. That's really hard to do. And so I remember there was a strategy that I had come to you and said, hey, Ken, I want to do this. And I said, look, it's kind of crazy, but I want to take the current business, we're going to package it up, we're going to sell it to our existing partners, and then we're going to, at the same time, build a new thing underneath this. And we're going to power it with basically gum and tape. And you said, okay, we can do that. Here's how we would do it. And what I think was unique about your approach is you never said no. You always said absolutely, but here are going to be the consequences and the costs and the considerations of how we're doing this. And you said, look, culture is going to potentially suffer. You're not going to be able to make investments in all the areas that you want. And we're going to have to be super efficient, which means watching our metrics, not on a monthly basis, but maybe even daily. How's pipeline growing? And that was so enlightening, at the time, was to see that anything is possible, but how you get there is something that really has to be just manipulated and monitored and managed. And so I felt like we were great at saying, grand vision makes sense. Here's how we can do that. And here's what we're going to watch to know that it's actually happening. And you said we need one metric. And I remember the one metric was gross margin. Every deal that we do has to improve our gross margin.
Yep.
And I don't know if you want to speak to that, but.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because I remember the strategy was aggressive.
Yeah.
One of the things I always think about is it's easier to think about things to do. It's harder to think about what, and having the discipline to make decisions around what we won't do. And so I remember our experience. There were a few times where I had to slow you down and just sort of say, hey, promise, like, we can't do all of this all at once.
Right.
Let's pick and choose and prioritize. The other part is
I hate that word.
Yeah, no,
prioritize.
Because it means fundamentally you can't do everything you want to do.
It means actively saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's sometimes the hardest thing with CEOs, because CEOs got to that role because they're intelligent, they have vision, they have a strategy. And then having a CFO say, okay, that's a good strategy, but we can't do it all at once.
Right.
We can't do these 5 things all at once. And so it's a trade-off. It's and that comes from just being disciplined. I see a lot of companies where just a little discipline goes a long way. Whether it's you're going to hire this extra person or this additional person, or you're not going to do something because you can reinvest and double down someplace else.
Right.
That's one of the lessons I've always learned, and sometimes it's hard. You sometimes get labeled as the no guy.
I never saw you as that.
And in the end, there's a lot of ways to sort of have the dialogue without saying no. And that's what I've really learned over the years. I think early in my career, I would just say no. And now, now I really just try and have a dialogue about it.
Yeah.
And say, okay, here are choices. Because, and like I tell my kids, life is about choices, and choices have consequences. Typically, they're good. Sometimes they're not so good. And we all learn from them all, but hopefully you try and avoid the choices that have negative consequences. And we all have had some and made some mistakes along the way, but it's really having that dialogue and that trust. In the end, a CFO and a CEO, everything they do is based on trust.
And it's a conversation. So just to kind of draw together a thread. Mm-hmm. We made the decision. You said, let's get some priorities in place.
Yep.
I think you also were really good at taking that string of this decision to go this direction. And you said, okay, these are the things, okay, we got to change this. Comp plans, we've got to change how we hire. We've got to make this team variable and contract versus that. And so I feel like a great CFO can take a vision from the CEO and in a conversation, kind of pull the thread of how accountability, right, you use that word, and discipline move throughout the operation. Because that wasn't something that, is necessarily the strength of every CEO, which is, okay, I want to go make this happen. You start marching in that direction, and then you don't realize, okay, your comp plans don't align.
Right.
Who you hired, the skill sets that you have on the team. You've got services people, but you need account management people. Mm-hmm. You need customer success people. Have we thought about evolving this team to be more like what we need? And so I thought you were exceptional at saying, okay, we're going to make this move, but here are all the not consequences, but
here are the things we got to go do.
Right. And so as CEO, I don't think you should always have to make those. And as a young CEO, you think, I got to be good at everything.
Right.
But what I learned was, no, I don't have to be good at it. A turnaround CEO is the most energetic person and the best salesperson in the company. And that means you're focused on doing that really well, but maybe not always owning the downstream details and the implementation.
A CEO can't own everything.
No.
From an execution perspective. They can own the vision. They can be responsible for, the results and so forth. But in the end, good CEOs, they build great teams. They put people around them that they know can execute. I always think about the what and the why, and CEOs are phenomenal at this. They're really good at, hey, here's what we should do, here's why we should do it.
Right. Where
I think that a CFO can add a tremendous amount of value is, okay, now let's talk about the how. Let's talk about how we're going to do it, because if you have that dialogue, it's a whole different set of thinking.
Right.
Promise you, there were some times where you said, well, I'm not going to do that. I said, you don't have to. But here's how I think we should
do it.
And we have this discussion. And so I think that, the role of a CFO, sometimes they play the role of the main executor. Like, go and get this done.
The main investor, because you're executing the investment of money across the organization.
Based on the strategy and the vision, we're now investing our resources in these different areas.
Right.
And you've got to measure that, because no one has infinite resources. And so, are we getting the kind of result and return we were expecting?
So that's the closed loop. Here's the strategy. Here's what we're going to execute. Here's the accountability, the discipline. And oh, by the way, here's the return we got.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what we expected, or it was more than we expected. And we had both those discussions.
Yeah, we did.
So talk about board, because I learned a lot from you around this dance of, hey, promise, I've got your back unconditionally, but oh, by the way, I'm responsible to our investors. And so how do you, right now we're sitting in Mozilla's office and it's beautiful here. And like every CEO, I imagine all your CEOs want to, have big parties and celebrate every employee's birthday and have, the best things in the fridge and only the most organic food. But that isn't always the best investment from a fiduciary standpoint. And so how do you see your role vis-a-vis the company, the CEO, and the board? Like, where do you sit?
Well, it's interesting because the CFO and the CEO are both fiduciaries for the investors.
Yep.
I always look at it like, for example, when I close a financing round or help close a financing round, that's an investor's money. It's not my money.
Right on.
And so we have to invest that in a way that builds value for the business and hopefully valuation for the company. It's a tricky job because you're accountable to both. CEO is accountable to the board and the investors. CFO is accountable to the CEO and the board and the investors. And try to ensure that there's alignment, because there isn't always alignment on it. Maybe sometimes a point topic.
Interesting.
And or an investor may have a particular perspective that's not aligned with a CEO, and sort of having that discussion and dialogue. And we had many of those discussions with an investor perspective, and just some of it's through experience. Like, okay, this is where this investor's probably coming from.
Yeah.
And other times, like, well, no, what they're saying is probably it's reasonable. We should really think about, not investing in these 5 areas, but really only 3. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act. I think and this goes back to the trusted relationship aspect of it all. I'm a firm believer, because I am a fiduciary and accountable directly to a board, as well as the CEO. I need to have a direct relationship with those board members. Some CEOs, particularly ones who have a little less experience or feel like they've been burned before because they didn't have that kind of tight relationship with their CFO, get a little gun shy. So I've worked with some CEOs who did not want me to have that direct relationship or would quiz me on what was discussed. The reality is, if you have the right kind of relationship with a CEO, it's natural. It's not a big deal.
But so we're going to talk about that, and then I want to know from you what CEOs or what opportunities would you say no to? So I'm going to ask that question. Then we're going to talk about diversity for a minute, because I'm eager to get your perspective. But as a CEO, the day that you're in a board meeting, I remember we were raising $14 million in our Series B. And I remember the board saying, how do you think this is going to come together? What's your use of proceeds vision? And I remember going up to the board and I drew a pie chart and I was like, here's what we're going to do, and da-da-da-da-da. And I remember one of our investors, who is kind of a traditional guy, turned to you and said, Ken, what are we doing with this money? And so part of it as a CEO means you have to relinquish a little bit of, it's not control. It's, as a CEO, I think your influence can be different if you have a strong finance partner.
I think you're right.
And clearly the board saw you as someone who could see that from a bottoms-up perspective, whereas I was thinking more spiritually about how we're going to invest the money. And so are there CEOs where that doesn't work? And do you find yourself kind of assessing that early on and saying, this isn't going to work because of these reasons? Like, when do you say no to a CEO?
Yeah, there are CEOs where it doesn't work.
Okay.
And it tends to be a situation where that CEO has some insecurity about his or her role.
We all do. Okay, next.
We're human.
Yeah, we're human, right.
I usually ask 2 or 3 telling questions.
What do you ask?
One of the questions is, do you want somebody to push back on you and to not be a yes person?
So how will you feel in the future when I say no or when I push back?
Exactly.
Okay.
And 100% of the time, in my experience, everyone just says, oh yeah, no, that would be great. In the end, that's not actually always the case, because there are some CEOs who just want you to do what they desire.
And that's not interesting.
And that's not me.
Yeah.
And in fact, I flat out typically will tell a CEO, if you're looking for a yes guy, I'm not your guy. I'm the wrong person. You can go find somebody. I'm not going to be that person.
So the first question is, how will you react and respond when I?
Yes.
Okay.
And how do we handle disagreements?
Yeah.
I said, as long as my perspective is we can disagree all we want, as long as it's with just the 2 of us. And when we leave the room, we're completely aligned. So that's one question. Second question is, do you have any issue if I have a direct relationship with each of the board members? And the answer, again, is 9 times out of 10, No, that'd be great. No problem. But I usually push on it. How often do you talk to the board?
And why do you ask that question?
Because of my fiduciary responsibility, because boards oftentimes will seek out the CFO to validate a perspective of what they're hearing from a CEO.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that we're always on the same page. And so there's a question or a curiosity around a particular subject that the CEO and the CFO are completely aligned, but at the same time, it's coming independently from a CFO's voice. So that's another question that I ask. And the third one I always ask is, what do you want this company to be, and what's your real vision? Because if you don't dream big, like, why bother?
Why get out of bed?
You know, I'm not a lifestyle business type of guy. I'm a growth and change agent type of personality. And
absolutely.
My how I live is like, if I'm not moving forward, I'm moving backwards. There is never a status quo. And so if I'm dealing with a CEO who maybe is a little comfortable, that's usually a sign that I'm probably not, for me, I'm not a great fit, because I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable. I want to move up and to the right. I want to grow. I want to keep evolving and changing. And because businesses do that, children do that, we all do that.
That's powerful,
so if we're not moving forward, then we are moving backward. The world doesn't change. Our competitors don't stop and say, hey,
wait for those guys.
Yeah. Those guys are ahead and we're not going to do anything about it. You know, it's a competitive world out there, and it's only gotten more competitive with the speed of innovation, the speed of data and information, the amount of data that is available now to CEOs, CFOs. It's almost data overload. Like, how do you sift through it? But you've got to take that and turn it into an action plan and evolve.
I mean, you just hit on a really emotional point for a lot of CEOs, which is, I'm just going to say it, like, control is an illusion, right? We have no control. And so, you know, I do remember the board. In all my previous CEO jobs, I was the person who had the direct communication with investors. And with working with you, you were like, look, I love your promise, but I also have a responsibility. So I'm going to reach out if I feel they need to know something, which is fine. But also, I'm having these conversations with these guys who are back channeling and confirming. And I initially thought that was about me. And I remember panning other CFOs, and they said, no, it happens with every CEO.
Absolutely.
Every board. And so what I got comfortable with was like two things. One, I'm a player, and I may need to be moved at some point off this board. And so I don't get to control when that happens. So I can be really committed to the company I'm working for, but the board and the investors should always be making the best decision for the company.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because sometimes investors are focused on making the best decision for themselves.
True.
As opposed to the health of the business. And that's where a conflict can happen, actually, because the CEO is about building the business.
Right.
As well as building value for the investors and shareholders. Some investors are focused only on what's in it for me. And
their interests.
And in the end, you know, you don't begrudge anyone who has invested money and is focused on turning that investment into a positive return, or the return that they expect.
But that's their job.
That is their job.
That's their job.
And I respect that.
Yeah.
The reality, though, is that, you know, CFO, I don't necessarily always proactively reach out to a board member, because I'm not going to reach out to a board member unless I have something to discuss, something that's important and material. For example, I oftentimes will preview an annual budget, and I'll walk them through it, because it's my way of getting feedback before
the big events.
Before I have to go and present it to a board for approval. What are the issues that you see? I'm going to take you through this, and there inevitably will ask questions. And so to me, I don't necessarily always do that with a CEO. I'm happy to do it with the CEO president as well. But I'm now getting independent
validation,
feedback and validation. Hey, I'm on the right track, or no, I think I'm a little bit off here. I might have to adjust something. The most important thing when my interaction as a CFO with a board is the communication with the CEO. I don't necessarily have to script everything, but I do need to make sure that they're in the loop and say, hey, I'm going to meet with such and such investor. We're going to talk about these three things. And then, hey, here's how the meeting
what
went.
happened, yeah.
And so that a CEO never gets surprised, because we all hate surprises.
We all hate surprises.
And again, it goes back to communication and ultimately, that trusted partnership.
So, I mean, just to kind of put a bow around that, I mean, I feel like what I learned in our partnership was that the CFO is definitely part of the execution chain.
Yep.
But more valuably, I feel like you and everyone listening should look. There's two things. You're the chief investment officer, right? Like, I'm going to take the CEO's vision and the capital we have and find the best ways to execute that vision through investing, right?
Deploying resources.
Deploying resources, and I'm going to close that loop, and I'm going to show us what kind of ROI we got. Mm-hmm. And I think that's powerful. The second is, once I let go of the desire to have control, I realized having someone who vets the budget with the board before the meeting, surfaces any potential issues, coagulates and gets all that feedback and confers with me is an alignment partner. And the benefit, because the investors are thinking about, their return. The board is thinking about the dynamics of what's happening inside the company, but more from an objective perspective. Mm-hmm. And the CEO is in it. Like, you're in it every day. You're talking to customers. You're putting out fires. And so it's very easy to get off alignment. And so I felt like you did an amazing job of just saying, let me just make sure that we're all aligned and that we're having conversations that might be obvious to you, but maybe not to you. And so I think that's great. So I want to pivot. I want to be respectful because you have a full-time job, maybe several. There's a lot of talk right now about women as leaders. You obviously have a very strong and successful wife who is highly influential. You've got 3 daughters who are all badasses. What was it like for you to have a female? Was that your first?
You were my first.
Oh my goodness. Okay, excellent.
So
Tell me, what was that like?
One, I don't think we have enough female CEOs and CFOs and people in this.
Thank you for saying that.
I think that there's been some progress, but there's more progress to be made, and we see it even within our own partnership. I think we've got about 20% of our partners are women. It's different. It's different in a few ways, and this is some life learning. Being in a household of only women, I think women CEOs and leaders, they tend to be better listeners. They tend not to jump and start doing. They tend to just sort of. My sense is that women leaders, their EQ tends to be a little higher than some of the male leaders that I've worked with. And like for me and some of my journey, I've had to learn a lot more about that and understand it better. I'm a better CFO now than I was once upon a time because of it. And that diversity actually can be quite powerful. And whether it be in decision making, whether it be in how you build a culture or an organization, it was a phenomenal experience. And part of that, again, it goes back to we built a relationship that worked. There are some people who that would be more difficult. I put that on most of the male C-suite, that there's a learning there. And I think if you're open and you're willing to learn, best perspective, best practices from anybody. There's a big push on D&I in corporate America right now, and I think that's a good thing. Compared to once upon a time. I mean, how many women CEOs were there, 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Like none. Even you look at the Fortune 500, which has not had to evolve quite as fast generally as the tech industry, and how many women CEOs are there? So the numbers will start catching up as society has embraced opportunity for women, and with that financial flexibility that didn't afford some prior generations. So it's tremendous. But I think learning the ability around EQ of an organization, how to build a culture. Some women are that I've met and worked with are actually much more cut and dry in some cases. Nope, we're not going to do that, and very decisive, and I love that. And so with you, you're a very decisive, clear thinker, and so that it just worked. And so I enjoy working with women, and particularly in senior roles, because for me, there's more learning.
There's more learning. Would you ever encourage your daughters to be a CEO?
Absolutely.
You would.
I wish.
You would.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But there's again, with life, there's choices and there are consequences. And making one choice, you typically give up something else. And so, it's very hard. I am amazed just in society when I meet working mothers. My wife was a single working mother when I met her. Absolutely amazing. And the reality in society is that even in the household, most women still do more work at home in the household than men. And yet they're juggling all this other stuff. And women are very good at multitasking. I think that's a generally well-known fact. And so I would encourage them, not necessarily to be, if they're not a CEO, that's fine, but to be a leader in whatever they do. And I encourage that of not just women, anybody. Go and lead. Take a risk. Go for it. And,
I love that.
And again, if you're not going for it, then what are you doing? You're standing still.
And you're up and to the right guy.
Yeah, up and to the right.
Ken, thank you. Thanks for the marathon of sitting here with me. It's beautiful to talk about your background, and I'm so honored to have worked with you. And thank you for all we did together. I mean, I was thinking to myself, how can we work together again as we were going?
I promise, honestly, the pleasure was all mine. I loved working with you and would do it again. And the great thing is that more than anything, I not only had a great working relationship, but I felt like I built a friendship.
We did build a friendship, and I learned more working with you in those 9-12 months than I think I've learned in my career. The thing that I feel is important as a woman leader is, to take each of these experiences as a lesson. And so that's what I hold true to myself.
One of the things that I'll tell you that I learned from you is, she is running a mile a minute. I've got to really listen to everything she's saying and really concentrate on where the best value is in the conversation. And so my listening skills, I keep working on them and I try to get better every day. But something that I learned because I had to be better just to keep up with you.
Good for you. Good for everyone. Thank you, Ken. And I'll let you get back. But thank you so much. Warriors, this is Promise again. So that was a really interesting interview, I imagine, for a lot of you. Parts 1 and 2 for those who stuck it out and did both. Some interesting takeaways from Ken and some learnings for me, actually. It was good to go through that process and really talk through what we learned and why Ken wanted to work with me. So it was really helpful to get that perspective. And as entrepreneurs, it's easy to move on from one thing to the next. But what this podcast has done for me has been an opportunity for me to meet with and connect with people that I love and respect and admire. And really to take in the experience and listen to them and translate their takeaways so that I can learn. I've been a really successful entrepreneur. I've started companies, I've joined existing companies, I've done turnarounds, I've raised venture capital, private equity, and I've sold companies to public companies. I've been through an IPO. Really, I've experienced a lot. And what this podcast series does is allows me to connect with you, but also it's an opportunity for me to really solidify and codify, to use a word that I love so much, to just get real and to start to take those experiences and translate them into takeaways. So I hope this is something that you guys enjoy. Would love to get your feedback. You can drop me a line at promise@thegrowthwarrior.com. Love to get your questions. Love to get your show ideas. Be great to connect. All right. Take care of yourself. Be well.